across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio, the voice of the Times.
It's 6 o'clock. I'm John Pienaar. Welcome to Pienaar Friends. Tonight, that's Kate Ferguson from The Sun on Sunday and Mikey Smith from The Mirror. And you, I'm happy to say, send me your thoughts. Join in the chat. Send me a text or a tweet. And we can talk after the news with Laura Cook.
Thank you. Good evening. EU member states have voted through measures to counter Donald Trump's tariffs on the day a 20% levy was imposed on the bloc. This European vote is in response to earlier US tariffs made on imports of steel and aluminium from the EU, announced last month. Elsewhere, China is raising taxes to 84% on American products to take effect tomorrow after Trump imposed a 104% tariff on Chinese goods entering the United States. The president's message is simply be cool. Jack Barnett is economics correspondent for The Times and explained how markets have been responding.
It's been another day of pretty sharp falls in stock markets. So if you look in Europe, that's where the falls have been the most pronounced. The FTSE 100 down about 2.5%. Similar fall for the Stoxx 600, which is the sort of pan-European index as well. So it's a similar story that we've obviously seen play out over the last week. We got that sort of temporary reprieve in stock prices quite recently, which kind of rekindled some hopes amongst investors that we may have reached the peak volatility, but it doesn't seem as if we've got there quite yet.
Elsewhere, the Chancellor has announced £128 million worth of deals and investments with India following a meeting with her counterpart in London. The plans include more investment for Paytm, which is India's largest digital payment app, so they can expand in the UK. It will also see HSBC Bank more than double its presence in India from 14 to 34 cities. A 20-year-old man has been found guilty of stabbing to death a mother in front of her 3-year-old daughter in West London. Cher Maximan, who was 32, was attending Notting Hill Carnival's Family Day when she was attacked last August. Her family say the little girl's last living memory of her mother is dropping to the floor. Shakil Tibu will be sentenced next month. Lead investigating officer DCI Alex Gamipala spoke outside the Old Bailey.
The investigation team has worked diligently to build a case against him. Their work has made sure Cher's family and friends have been able to get justice. I commend their bravery and the dignified way they have handled this trial.
It's still unclear what led to a crash on the A1 this morning involving 5 marked cars, which led seven police officers in hospital. A man and a woman, both in their 20s, have been arrested. Northumbria police haven't commented, but the stretch of the A1 near Newcastle has now reopened in both directions. The Prime Minister is described today as momentous and important as Universal agrees to build a theme park in the UK. The resort near Bedford is the company's first such venture in Europe. It's due to open by 2031 and is expected to boost the UK economy by £50 billion. Sir Keir Starmer says the Comcast investment is amazing for Britain.
People said to me, government will be a roller coaster, and I can testify to that. I don't think this is quite what they meant, but look, this is our plan for change in action, bringing investment, bringing opportunity, growth, jobs, and of course joy to Britain.
And for a roundup of news on demand, you can subscribe to the Times News Briefing podcast.
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, on the free Times Radio app, and via your smart speaker.
John Pienaar on Times Radio Drive with NatWest Cushion.
It's good to have your company on Pienaar and Friends. An hour of good conversation in cracking good company, which tonight is Kate Ferguson from The Sun on Sunday. Hey, Kate.
Hi, John.
Good to see you. Mikey Smith here too, of course. They go together like a horse and carriage. Mikey Smith at the Mirror, good to see you.
Hi.
Mikey, what's your thought for the day?
My thought for the day is finally, after all these years, it's time to look for property in Bedford.
Okay.
Universal Studios
it'll be compulsorily purchased.
Presumably, yes,
Yeah.
but maybe a little outside the zone. But yeah, no, finally we're getting a proper theme park. Nothing wrong with Alton Towers and Chessington World of Adventures,
Other theme
of
parks
course.
are available.
A very large theme park, a great US import, in fact.
Yeah.
No tariffs on that, though.
No tariffs on that. But yeah, no, I've been following this story for years, so I'm delighted it's finally out there and writable.
Are you following it because you like roller coasters, or?
A little bit, yeah. Also because, someone tipped me off about it years ago. But it's one I've been following, and yes, I am a bit of a roller coaster nerd. Yeah. I've been to the one in Florida. Yeah. It's fantastic.
It bears taking a bit seriously. I mean, it would be and will be opening in, what was it, 2030?
2031.
2031. It'll be the biggest theme park in Europe, which I suppose includes Euro Disney, which is quite a feat to overtake that, and they're in Bedford, which is chosen because it's just so easy to get to. It's handy for everywhere.
Lots of really good transport links. They're adding a station. I think there's another station already being built a stone's throw away in a little village next door. And the thing that is going to be remarkable about this, I think, that might be double helping for Keir Starmer is how quickly they're building it. 6 years is no time for an infrastructure project that huge. I mean, if you compare that to, let's say, HS2, a much bigger project, obviously, but moving at a crawl. And I heard a rumour, I don't know if this is 100% true, but you could believe it, that Universal went to the people who were building the station and said, give us the money, we'll build the station, we'll build it in half the time and we'll give you the change. That is how quickly they built. They've just built one in Florida, a third park in Florida, which is going to be about three times the size of the one we're getting. And they built it in 6 years, and that was with a pandemic in the middle of it.
Right. Are you going to be in the queue, Kate?
Absolutely. Oh, sorry. I was about to say absolutely not. Sorry, no shade on Universal Studios' brilliant new theme park. That was more a point because I actually am really scared of roller coasters.
Oh, no.
I've only been on one in my life. I'm much more like log flume. That kind of lane.
Well, there'll be that stuff
I like
too,
the teacups. Yeah, I mean, I could go and do like hooker duck. I used to like all my pet goldfish were from hooker duck. So I've got good.
I think you're getting the skull of this slightly.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm their target audience.
I calm down when I go on a roller coaster. My heart rate goes down.
That is weird. Yeah, that's weird. What's your thought for the day?
So, I want to know, John, do you think Five Guys burgers are posh? Because I wrote a story at the weekend describing Five Guys burgers as posh burgers because they cost 10 times as much as a McDonald's. And this sort of sparked uproar on Twitter as everyone told me fast food can't be posh. So what do you think, Mikey? Is Five Guys posh?
I make a distinction between the word posh and the word expensive. I don't think Five Guys is posh. I think it's very expensive.
I thought at like £15 a pop for a burger takeaway.
Sounds like a lot.
That's about as posh as a burger gets, I thought.
I'm not just old school, I'm really old school when it comes to burgers. I mean, I like a good burger as much as anybody else, but I quite like the old burgers I remember from my early youth, you know.
Gosh.
I mean, I'm in danger of advertising inappropriately, but there's an old burger, Wimpy. Okay, you must have seen the old Wimpy, right? They're named
one Wimpy I've seen.
Yeah, they used to feature in Popeye black and white cartoons when cartoons were grainy, scratchy cartoons, and there was a character in Popeye. Some people might remember whose name was Wimpy. He used to love Wimpy burgers, but I used to love them. I used to enjoy an old school Wimpy before football on a Saturday when I'd go down and watch my team, Crystal Palace. It's no longer there, sadly, and I miss it and mourn it. Well, so there's no point in asking me these things. But if you tell me it's a wonderful burger, I believe you.
Well, basically, it was a story because a few civil servants had gone in to try and get their posh burgers on the procurement cards. And my spies tell me that their access was denied because Pat McFadden's turned off 20,000 government credit cards. So they were trying to spend taxpayers' money on these, as I called them, posh burgers. Which do cost quite a lot of money, 15 quid a burger.
To take away? 15 quid?
Yeah. That is true.
They're really costly.
They're really expensive.
Don't go too far.
You can go to like a gastro pub for that.
They're very nice. Don't get me wrong. I like a Five Guys burger, but it doesn't cost nothing.
Anyway, so everyone's very kind of haughtily told me it's impossible for a burger to be posh, but I stand by my description. These are posh burgers, and probably taxpayers' money shouldn't go on them. So there we go.
Right. Okay. I mean, before we move on and talk about tariffs and so on, I just want to just share this with you. Just a bit of breaking news, which is, if you want to pass it on as soon as it's to come in, which is now. It is that Ukrainian intelligence has information. It is reported that 155 Chinese citizens were fighting for Russia against Kyiv on Ukrainian territory. Just a couple were captured the other day, and everyone was wondering, what does that mean? Are these sponsored by the Chinese state? What are they doing there? Well, 155, that's quite a big number. And Zelensky is saying that Russia is recruiting Chinese citizens via social media, and Chinese officials are aware of this. I wonder if that's necessarily being a part of it, or in some way condoning or encouraging it, or in some way making it happen. But Beijing said they're verifying the claims. They reiterate that Chinese citizens are prohibited from participating in foreign armed conflicts. Interesting story, though, isn't it? I mean, an understandable degree of alarm when Chinese fighters turn up in the Ukrainian war.
Absolutely. I mean, we've already had North Koreans go over, haven't we? Lots of them fighting. I mean, Zelensky's right to publicise that. It's very alarming if more countries are getting quietly involved. And in today's world, that won't stay quiet for very long.
Yeah. I mean, Beijing denying it. If there was any question of these people being state-sponsored in any way, that would be a altogether different level of international tension. But I don't know. Can you imagine? Why would Beijing want to do that? They can sort of help Russia, and they are, in all sorts of different ways without doing that.
That's true, but they could, I mean, if Russia's still kind of using that country to go and kind of wholesale recruit, and they're turning a blind eye to that domestically or whatever, that's still bad. Even if they're holding it at arm's length, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Indeed. Now, so let's then talk about, for a bit, put yourself in the shoes of Keir Starmer, who he hasn't got a date in the diary to see the president. I think in the White House, he wants that. He wants to talk a deal. He wants to get a deal. We're told the end of the month is when they envisage maybe making some sort of deal if it can be made. It's only a couple of weeks away, so it doesn't leave a huge amount of time. So Keir Starmer will be working out his plan. He'll have all sorts of ideas for what the trade deal might contain, and he will have to have a game plan on how to deal with Donald Trump. I wonder if this will encourage him or maybe concern him when you think of what the president had to say at a political dinner last night about those foreign leaders, he says, are queuing up to talk to him.
I'm telling you, these countries are calling us up, kissing my ass. They are dying to make a deal. Please, sir, make a deal. I'll do anything, sir.
Well, what would any world leader think if that's how he's describing the queue waiting to see him in the White House? Now, Keir Starmer, his thoughts on this are expressed much more moderately. He was talking earlier on. This is what he said.
For months beforehand, this question of, will taxes go up? Will there be more spending? We had it at the last budget. We're very clear about our rules then. We just had it with the spring statement, very clear about our rules. I'm very clear about the rules we've got. Those fiscal rules are here for a purpose. They're here to stay. And my job and the Chancellor's job is to grow our economy, to create the conditions to take the necessary decisions at the budget.
Well, you get the point there. He's very much sticking to the script, whether it's about whether taxes are going to have to go up in the light of the tariff or whatever it happens to be. It's a well-worn script. And Keir Starmer, well, he's quite good at that. What would you be thinking right now, Mikey, if you were listening to Donald Trump talking about world leaders, of anyone offended by the president's language? I apologise for that, but it's him, not me, about world leaders queuing up to kiss his ass.
The first thing I would think is there is a rule of thumb with Donald Trump that whenever he puts on a funny voice and pretends to be someone else calling him sir, specifically that, which he does from time to time, what he's saying did not happen. So he's overblowing the number of people who are coming to him.
He said the latest number was 70, I think.
That did not happen.
Okay.
That absolutely did not happen.
There's a lot of people affected by this, Mikey.
There are, and I'm certain some of them are coming and asking questions. But I don't think it's, I don't think he's talking to that many people. I think people are coming through to the rest of his team, and the rest of his team are speaking on his behalf. Yeah. If I was Keir Starmer, I'd be starting to realise, A, we're probably quite low down on his pecking order for resolving.
Yeah, low on the pecking order, but time running out.
Low on the pecking order, time running out, but also I think the likelihood of him getting to us and agreeing to get rid of the tariffs is fairly low. Yeah. Because this isn't really about negotiation as far as Trump's concerned. This is about balancing trade, and it's nonsense. It's this wild idea he's had in his head for 40 years that he's finally getting into a position of, I can do this and there's no downside for me personally. So he's trying it. And it sounds like he's going to keep doing it. So if I'm Keir Starmer, I'm looking at that and I'm like, I really have to just insulate myself from this. Yeah.
Look, clearly the president wants to reshore jobs. He wants production back into America, which was offshored, which was sent out over past years. He blames Joe Biden for a lot of all that. But he also, listening to that, he wants to come out as the winner. He wants these other leaders to walk away the loser, and he quite likes the idea of a certain amount of humiliation for them. If you're Keir Starmer, it's not encouraging, is it?
I guess it's a bit of a kind of the court of Trump, right? They all have to come over, kiss the ring, do the deal, and Trump says, "Oh, they're kissing my ass." Well, clearly, every political leader that wants to do business for Trump is having to chat him up. I mean, Mikey and I do that every day in our jobs, right? Chat politicians up. You might say, "God, Kate, she's out there kissing there."
Actually, that would
make it work.
No,
for
I would
you,
not
don't
only
you?
would I
You
not
do
say that, but I wouldn't think that because that's not what you do. There's a difference between charm and obsequiousness or putting up with.
Yes, I suspect. Yes, all right, fine. But so anyway, there's a reality of the court of Trump, right? Where you go kiss the ring, you have to try and be charming, you have to flatter him. That's life. When you were saying about the trade deal, we have seen a bit of a change of language in Number 10, the various departments dealing with it. So obviously at first they were trying to race to get this deal before tariff day. Could they be exempt from tariffs? No way. So now we're in this new world. Keir Starmer says tariffs are here to stay. We're in a new world. He's talking about the end of globalisation. Don't really know what he means by that pointless phrase, but fine. But you get the idea, this vibe shift, that protectionism, some level of tariffs, a kind of America First onshoring policy is here to stay. So then what are they hoping to get with the trade deal? Some carve out from bits of tariffs, maybe cutting them a bit. And can you do some kind of services deal or trades which give you a boost? Can you package that up and take that as a political win, and it will ameliorate the economic impact of these tariffs? And I think that's the zone Keir and his team are in, really.
Okay. And charm. I mean, I want to talk about this in just a moment.
In defence of charm.
I mean, the Prime Minister has already handed over the invitation to, I don't know if it's Buckingham Palace or Sandringham, but a visit to see Balmoral, to see the King, and get the whole treatment, a full state visit. Now, having done that, what on earth can you do to butter up Donald Trump? We'll get your thoughts on that. Imagine if you're forming the plan. And how would you brief the Prime Minister to have that conversation? How can you flatter and please, as you say, Kate, Donald Trump without completely selling your soul? How do you do that without losing the power to look at yourself in the mirror afterwards? There are ways of doing this. Maybe get your advice on all of that. This is Pienaar and Friends on Times Radio in association with
today.
John Pienaar on Times Radio Drive with NatWest Cushion, putting your employees in control of their financial future. Search NatWest Cushion to find out more.
So because we'd like to be helpful here on Pienaar Friends, Kate Ferguson, Mikey Smith is here, and your suggestions are more than welcome. We're just wondering, what advice, if you want to give advice to Keir Starmer, would you give the Prime Minister on how to get on the right side and stay there with Donald Trump next time you have the meeting? Assuming you can get on his invitation list, assuming you can get over there in the hope of getting a better deal. And Kate, you were just telling me something which was news to me, which maybe contains a tip for how to help to get on Donald Trump's right side. A proud man of Scottish ancestry.
Yeah.
Just tell me what you were telling.
Yeah, so Fergie's Charm School is open for business, John Pienaar, and I'll give you some ideas. So this week in America, I think it's called Tartan Week. It's basically a big thing in New York where everyone celebrates Scottish heritage and culture. So if you think about how much the Democrats used to love St. Patrick's Day and hug that really close, and how Ireland used that politically to get very close to that regime. I think that Keir Starmer, and I do know that Keir Starmer's regime, is leaning into Tartan Week. They're sending over to the Tartan Army in Murray and Co. to go and chat up the Americans, hoping that...
Which Americans have they got?
I haven't got their itinerary.
No, but members of the administration.
I'm sure they hope so. I'm sure they're hanging out with some Republicans.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's probably a bit of a failure if they've not got to any Republican.
No, sure. So kilts in their suitcases.
So you're thinking kilts in the suitcases, whiskey in the not carry-on baggage, in the hold.
In their sporrans. I'm going to get accused of being
few bagpipes.
Stereotyping here. Yeah.
But I think it's very much is that, right?
Yeah,
like
quite.
It's a celebration of that kind of heritage. So, I mean, it's certain, but speaking more broadly, okay, Keir Starmer is certainly going to carry on flattering Trump and trying to hold him close. Yeah. So there's cultural links like that. You love the UK, you particularly love Scotland. Hey, that's us. Send over the Scottish minister and a bunch of Scottish MPs and try and build up that soft power. Yeah. If I was in the room, I've got some notes here, if I was Keir in the room with Trump, I would talk to Trump about how I would basically try and suggest they both were elected on the same sort of mandate. Now, that sounds a bit bonkers, because, Keir Starmer and Donald Trump are almost polar opposite individuals, but they both have big landslide mandates, both elected around the same time, within 6 months of each other. If I was Keir, I'd play up Brexit, that in this country, we broke from that EU bloc, and it was about... confidence, self-independence.
So coming on as a full-on Brexit enthusiast.
I would say to Keir, channel the blue
despite
Labour.
The fact that he was the exact opposite.
Don't mention that you campaigned for a second referendum. But, own it now. Own it now. You're in charge of not just Britain, it's Brexit Britain. Yeah. So, try and find the common ground there. Keir talks about how we're in a new world and how... we need to kind of onshore stuff here. So let's see if he can kind of find common ground.
I think there's another secret weapon that they can use that they haven't deployed yet. So everyone does Scotland, everyone does golf. Yeah. You take him golfing, talk about golf. Starmer doesn't play golf. He's not, as we know, Scottish. I think there's one person he could deploy that would make Trump love us forever. Andrew Lloyd Webber.
Tory
is a Tory, but a Brit nonetheless. He would maybe stand, come to the line for his country. Trump is a massive fan of 80s musicals.
Is he?
It's like the 90s never happened.
Well, sort of the Lloyd Webber stuff.
Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah.
Is his favourite musical.
Right. Really?
Second favourite musical is Les Mis.
I did not know that.
Absolutely true. This is why he's done the whole thing with the Kennedy Center. It's because he wants to see more musicals like Cats.
I thought he was just trying to sort of subsume American culture into the MAGA movement, but so he can see Cats.
If you go to one of Trump's speeches, he randomly plays selections from 80s musicals. Before his speeches, and I think if Starmer can arrange a meeting between these two great minds, then it'd stick in his mind for a very long time.
Oh, there you go, a useful bit of advice from Mikey Smith, and you'll have whether they're from the Foreign Office or wherever it is, the protocol department, just some tips in his briefcase on how you talk to Donald Trump at this moment. What can you say that's going to please him? Because you've got to please Donald Trump without completely selling his soul, because Keir Starmer is a man who wouldn't easily sell his soul. I mean, some thought that his last appearance was a little bit embarrassing, but he maybe stayed the right side of the line. What do you do? I mean, you can say, here's a phrase book for Donald Trump on how to go. You could say that, Mr. President, you're a history maker. Because he is, isn't he? And that's on the right side of the line. You could say you're consequential, historically consequential. You could say you're unique. The thing is, does anyone really know what Keir Starmer actually thinks of Donald Trump? There's certain assumptions are being made. I haven't seen any fascinating leaks to that effect. Have you heard any gossip on that?
Gosh, I bet that Keir Starmer doesn't say what he really thinks about Donald Trump to anyone in case it leaks, like maybe to his wife Vic, right? But he's not going to sit and tell Pat McFadden and everyone, God, I actually don't like the guy. He would be terrified that would get out. I'm sure he's far too discreet.
Yeah.
Well, whatever he's doing, he should probably just keep doing it. The entire of Europe apparently thinks of him as some kind of Trump whisperer.
Trump whisperer, yeah.
And keeps sending him over to do everyone else's dirty work for them. So, yeah, whatever he's doing, just keep doing it, I guess.
All right. Listen, I'm going to share this now because you will want to when you hear this story and what it is. It's just come in. It is a posting from the president on Truth Social, just dropped this minute, and I'm going to read this out in full. And the puncher is in the last line. Just have a listen to this. It says, based on the lack of respect, I'm now quoting Donald Trump, that China's shown to the world markets, I'm raising the tariff charged to China by the United States to 125%, effective immediately. So more significant escalation. And we haven't yet got to the key point. At some point, it goes on. Hopefully, in the near future, China will realise the days of ripping off the USA and other countries is no longer sustainable or acceptable. Conversely, and based on the fact that more than 75 countries, that number's gone up to, have called representatives of the United States, including Commerce, Treasury, and to negotiate a solution to the subjects being discussed relating to trade barriers, tariffs, currency manipulation, and non-monetary tariffs. And these countries have not, in my strong suggestion, retaliated in any way, shape or form against the United States. And here it comes. I've authorised a 90-day pause and a substantially lowered reciprocal tariff during this period of 10%. And also effectively, immediately, thank you for your attention to this matter. Well, Mr. President, you have got our attention.
Wow, so we're down to zero?
We're down to 10% by the look of that. The 20% tariffs, all of them down to 10%, which would include tariffs very much above that. The EU's 20% tariffs, those in the sort of Eastern Hemisphere, up far beyond 20%. And it's been paused. We've got the 90-day pause that was speculated upon a couple of days ago. The President has announced it. That, he is saying, is his way of handling it in his own way. That will be seen as, won't it, Kate and Mikey, as a very significant retreat under the pressure of markets, which have been rocking all over the place today. More drops, worrying drops. The President is pausing these tariffs. Hoping, no doubt, guys, what are your thoughts? Hoping for some sort of respite in the turmoil we're seeing now. What did you make of it, Kate?
Yeah, I mean, those markets have totally nosedived over the last few days. You've seen trillions wiped off the value of stocks and shares. Pundits were talking about being plunged into a global recession. And I think politically so interesting. Obviously, we know Elon Musk, this key advisor that Trump had brought into the White House with him, slagging off the tariffs too. Yeah. So, it had really plunged into turmoil. So I think you're right, it will be seen as a retreat. But also, that married with whacking them even higher on China, you go back, don't you, to the beginning cause of the tariffs, which was this trade war between the US and China, which is what we had always been originally braced for.
And look at the markets now. The Dow, the New York Stock Exchange, it is up 6.5% and climbing now, just on the moment since this announcement has been made. That is a steep recovery, and no doubt, 100% and more, what the president was really desperate to see. It's turned around the mood of the markets, and also it's turned around to a large extent the politics of what we've been seeing, with Donald Trump on this, head down, going for it, convinced of his own writings. What he's done, let's call it what it is, a spectacular U-turn.
Absolutely. It's one of the biggest U-turns I've ever seen. That graph that we're all looking at is as close to vertical as you can really get. Now, the interesting thing, I think, is going to come as that graph starts to settle down, because let's not forget that the reason the stock markets crashed so spectacularly when he brought the tariffs in was because the markets all expected him to say chicken at the last minute and delay them before they even came in. I mean, they've only been in effect since this morning, but the reason there was so much turmoil is the uncertainty, because if he's willing to go ahead with it, then there's no telling what the consequences are if he keeps going. But now, after this length of time, putting a 90-day pause on it, at the end of that 90 days, the uncertainty creeps in again, and no one really knows what happens after that.
4 p.m. New York time is when the New York Stock Exchange closes. That's when you get the closing bell. It'll be fascinating. So a little bit, what time have we got now? It's 6:30 here. They are now, I think New York are 4 hours behind. So
it's 1:30 in New York now.
1:30. Okay, so we've still got 2.5 hours of trading. There's plenty of time for that number to keep on climbing. It's now jittering about. I'm not going to give you a microsecond by microsecond commentary on the Dow, but the effect is really quite remarkable. And the question now is, as you say there, Mikey and Kate, is this going to turn around the entire narrative and the entire mood of the markets? And next question, which we'll address now and start to address more in a moment after the news. Sarah Baxter's going to join us from the States. Politically, does this mean a complete change of course by Donald Trump? A 90-day pause, and then what? Let's talk about that. We will, here on Pienaar and Friends. I wonder what you're thinking about this breaking story, listening to this, guys. Tell me your immediate thoughts on this really quite dramatic announcement by President Trump. A 90-day pause on tariffs. Tariff increases, except, of course, for China. Their tariff has gone up to 125%. Send me a text, 87222. Start with the word Times, or tweet to @TimesRadio. Right now, let's get the news with Laura Cook.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Thank you. Good evening. Within the last few minutes, Donald Trump has posted on social media, this time raising the tariff imposed on China to 125%, effective immediately. President wrote, based on the lack of respect that China has shown to the world's markets, I'm hereby raising the tariff charged to China by the USA to 125%. He also authorised a 90-day pause over all other reciprocal tariffs announced last week. Relatives of a woman stabbed to death at Notting Hill Carnival say her daughter's last living memory of her mother is falling to the floor. A 20-year-old man's been found guilty of murdering Cher Maximin last August. An abuser who murdered her husband and buried him in their garden in Kent has been jailed for at least 22 years. Prosecutors say Maureen Rickards, who's 50, caused Jeremy unimaginable pain and suffering in Canterbury. A former world snooker champion's been charged with child sex offences. Graham Dott from South Lanarkshire is due before the High Court in Glasgow in June. And Prince Harry's lawyers have argued his life is at stake with his presence at the Court of Appeal, an illustration of how much the case means to him. He's fighting the 2020 decision to strip him of police protection when in the UK. For a roundup of news on demand, subscribe to the Times News Briefing podcast.
This is Times Radio.
story over the course of the next half hour or so. And who are you going to be talking to?
So this evening, we've got David Smith, economics editor of the Sunday Times, to help us make sense of this. We'll be speaking to a former German MEP about the EU tariffs as well. We heard about the first wave of retaliation by the EU. And it's an interesting question. Now that Donald Trump's done this 90-day pause, will the EU not retaliate in the way that they planned against steel tariffs, etc.? There was the first wave of tariffs have been responded to by the EU today. That was announced by them. We're also going to be speaking to Dexter Roberts as well, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, author of The Myth of Chinese Capitalism. So we'll really dig into the China side of this. We'll talk a bit about pharma as well. Donald Trump threatened last night for tariffs on pharmaceuticals. We probably won't see that now, but it's a good point to have a little think about too. Mortgages have been affected by all the turmoil that's been going on, and we saw Coventry Building Society announcing a drop in their mortgage rate today, and other companies are expected to follow. So we'll talk about whether there's a bit of temporary good news in there for UK mortgage holders.
Right, OK, Kate, looking forward to that. Taking over this breaking running story at 7 o'clock here on Times Radio. Mikey Mikey Smith and Kate Ferguson. Mikey, I mean, you reminded us that earlier on, and I mentioned it at the top of Drive, there was a Truth Social posting by Donald Trump, which now looks, if we look at it in a different light. Have you got that in front of you?
Yeah, he said, hang on, I do have it in front of me. Yeah, this was 3 hours ago now. He tweeted in all capital letters, "This is a great time to buy." And if you'd bought shares in pretty much anything at that time, that was a great time to buy, because they'll be worth substantially more now.
We've all missed out on the chance there to become a gazillionaires.
We should have listened.
Yeah, I mean, well, my word. So we can get a view on this stateside right now from Sarah, who's joined us on the line. Sarah, hi to you.
Hello, John.
Goodness me, Sarah, what a story.
What a story. All of America, I think, is sighing with relief. I mean, this is really Donald Trump's Liz Truss moment, except he's not removable. I mean, well, everything was being, hit at once. As Kate was saying about, the stocks were down, the people were selling their treasury bonds, the dollars was being sold. So something had to give, and Donald Trump has just collided with reality. And I should say, by the way, though, he's having this 90-day pause and 10% tariffs remain across the board. So it's not as if we're back to where we were. What's more, the Dow is surging, but from a lower base. And, when you lose 10 to 15% points rather, and then you go up 5, you're from a lower base. So people aren't exactly back where they started, not by a long chalk.
For sure.
But there's some sense that the insanity is coming to an end. And I think what Donald Trump has been the people that Donald Trump has been listening to is some of his MAGA influencer base, the people he heavily courted before the election, who did so much to turn young male voters out for Trump, etc. They've all been screaming, look what's been happening to my stocks, to my portfolio. What are you doing, man? People like Ben Shapiro has been decrying the tariffs. And of course, the world's biggest male influencer, Elon Musk, as well. And in the end, Trump wanted to present it as, this is a sort of, Wall Street screaming, but Main Street loves
there will be, and there is enormous relief on Wall Street. I'm just going to interrupt you. Forgive me, Sarah, because the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, is speaking now in Washington. We're going to cut there live to the White House.
We saw the successful negotiating strategy that President Trump implemented a week ago today. It has brought more than 75 countries forward to negotiate. It took great courage for him to stay the course until this moment. And what we have ended up with here, as I told everyone a week ago, they're in this very spot, do not retaliate and you will be rewarded. So every country in the world who wants to come and negotiate, we are willing to hear you. We're going to go down to a 10% baseline tariff for them, and China will be raised to 125 due to their insistence on escalation.
Secretary, thank you for doing this. Let me ask you 3 quick things, if I could, just for the sake of clarity, because the markets are open and they're wondering. First of all, Mexico and China, are they part of this 10% universal?
Well, China No, China.
Mexico and Canada. Mexico and Canada. Are they part of the 10%?
Yes.
Okay. Second, given then that you have the rest of the world essentially calling it, it's not China, is this now just all about China?
Well, it's about bad actors, and what we will see is some of the very early countries are China's neighbors. That we're going to see. I'm seeing Vietnam today. Japan's at the front of the queue. South Korea, India. So we will see. And as I've repeatedly said, and President Trump has been saying it for years, China is the most imbalanced economy in the history of the modern world, and they are the biggest source of the U.S. trade problems. And indeed, they are problems for the rest of the world, because what we've seen is that as the U.S. announced a tariff wall last week, many of those goods have already started flooding into Europe.
So as you see it now, this trade war is China versus the rest of the world?
Well, I'm not calling it a trade war, but I am saying that China has escalated, and President Trump responded very courageously to that, and we are going to work on a solution with our trading partners.
If I could just, excuse me, Raquel, if I could just add to what the Secretary said. Many of you in the media clearly missed the art of the deal. You clearly failed to see what President Trump is doing here. You tried to say that the rest of the world would be moved closer to China, when in fact we've seen the opposite effect. The entire world is calling the United States of America, not China, because they need our markets, they need our consumers, and they need this president in the Oval Office to talk to them. And that's exactly why more than 75 countries have called, because the United States of America is the best place in the world to do business. And as the president has shown great courage, as the secretary has said, in choosing to retaliate against China even higher. Elena, go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Treasury Secretary Besson. Can you explain more of the decision making on what feels like a reversal here? I mean, just these went into effect less than 15 hours ago, these tariffs. Why the pause now? What led to that?
No, again, President Trump created maximum negotiating leverage for himself, and which tariffs went into effect 15 hours ago? The ones that we have lowered went into effect a week ago, they were announced a week ago, and we have just been overwhelmed by the response from mostly our allies who want to come and negotiate in good faith. So we are expecting them to come with their best deal. As I said a week ago today, don't retaliate, hold your ground, let's see what happens. And China, they kept escalating and escalating, and now they have 125% tariffs that will be effective immediately.
Mr. Secretary, go ahead. Mr. Secretary, thanks so much for doing this. The 90-day pause on the reciprocal tariffs, is that because of the whiplash that we've been seeing across the financial markets? How much was, what we saw in the stock markets, a part of this decision?
No, it's because because of the large number of inbounds. We've had more than 75 countries contact us, and I imagine after today there will be more. So it is just a processing problem. Each one of these solutions is going to be bespoke. It is going to take some time, and President Trump wants to be personally involved. So that's why we're getting the 90-day pause.
Mr. Secretary, Mr. Secretary, there was a tweet that you and Secretary Letnick were in the Oval Office with the president.
And we're going to put away now from what is clearly a very hastily convened news conference with the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent there, and you heard the voice of Caroline Leavitt, the president's press secretary there. A couple of things really leap out of that. One is what I think you can pretty much hear, the relief in the voice of the Treasury Secretary there. Scott Bessent is one of those who was not in the camp of trying to tear up the global trading order, the globalization that's marked the last decades and has been so much to America's benefit. He was of those who say, look, let's do some deals, sure, and try and get a fairer deal, but don't demolish the global economic order in the process. And looking at Scott Bessent, he's got a lot of what he wanted there when just a short while ago, I suppose a couple of hours ago, that was very far from being clear. Another point that leapt out from there was Caroline Leavitt's contribution, making the point that this is a victory for Donald Trump. No one's looking to China. What's she saying there? What's she really saying there? Clearly that the warnings about China being the geopolitical beneficiary of all of this, the idea that countries, and we've been talking about this on the program today, that countries on the wrong end of President Trump's tariffs would, in numbers, around the world, they'd be looking towards China, some of them, and it would enhance China. So tough as this is for China, tough as it will continue to be for China, the concern was in terms of spreading its influence and its power, this is also an opportunity. And we heard, I think, a recognition indirectly from President Trump's team of that fact too. So now we're going to talk now to, I think we've got a guest on the programme now who can give us his thought on all of this. Gerard Lyons, who's Chief Economic Strategist at Net Wealth, who's also on the board of the Bank of China UK. Gerard, welcome to you.
Good evening. Great to be on the show.
It's lovely to have you. So look, straight away, Gerard, your reaction to this breaking news?
Well, I think first and foremost, what's been announced is a positive development. It's not the best case scenario, which is a complete reversal of the tariff policy, but it's very much putting things on hold with respect to many countries for the moment. Obviously, we need to see more details, but I think it is important to stress that you've just touched on the politics in the US. What's been very evident, not just in the last few days, but particularly today, was the concerning nature of financial markets. We were almost moving to the next stage of an evolving financial crisis. Stock markets, which have already fallen across the world, were weak. And what we've seen particularly today is bond markets in America and also in the UK being hit hard. So when bond markets are hit against the backdrop of very weak stock markets, that's a cause for concern. And reinforcing that was a factor that many international investors were starting to become concerned about the safe haven nature of the dollar and of US bond markets, and about how to trust future US economic policy. So I think in many respects, there's a political element clearly in the States, but there's no doubt that financial markets were sending a very clear signal to the US policymakers that the financial markets wanted to see a reversal or a resolution of the tariff policy, and also ideally wanted to see some stimulatory measures to offset the current weakness and potential weakness of the US economy.
Yes.
But in terms of the actual tariff policy, the fact that there is a pause, but as I say, we need to see the full details. It doesn't remove all the problems. Let's stress that. But for the moment, let me just leave it there. It's a positive development, and markets will naturally reflect that. And there will likely be a significant reaction, not just this evening in the States, but probably overnight in Asian markets and tomorrow into the UK and European markets as well.
And have we entered a period of something? Well, I mean, nothing, anything would be comparative stability compared to what we've been seeing over recent days. But is this now going to be a period of well, maybe significant stability over a more prolonged period? And as you say, Gerard, I mean, Scott Bessent a moment ago was asked directly the question, is this about the turmoil in the market? He says, no, nothing to do with that. Well, hollow laugh at that. But of course, one will say, one will believe it has everything to do with the turmoil in the markets. And even though Donald Trump is famous for his sensitivity to the movement of markets, very keen to take credit. I can recall a huge press conference in the Rose Garden after one significant move upwards in the New York Stock Exchange. Yeah. He said he wasn't concerned about that, but he clearly is. He watches the markets like a hawk, and those around him more so. Scott Bessent is a Wall Street veteran. He'll have been very much, isn't it? And he'll have the numbers to back it up. Now, as for where we are now, you say it's not clearly, universally good news, Gerard. We still got the 10% tariff in place. That is there during this 90-day pause. But listening again to Bessent just a moment ago, he seems to think they see this as the beginning and not the end of a winding down process, doesn't he? He's talking about the world leaders. He says are queuing up. We've now heard the number of 75 of them who are looking for deals. Well, clearly, the Treasury Secretary is urging them on. He's hoping for a significant lessening of this tariff war over these 90 days.
Okay, well, let's be quite clear. What we still have in place is that globalization has been replaced in recent years, and particularly now, by fragmentation. And that still has to work its way through.
Yeah.
Free trade has been replaced by a move towards protectionism.
Yeah.
And reinforcing that is geopolitics is now intertwined with economics. Now, even though we're talking about the positive aspect, which is still nonetheless 10% tariffs across the board for all countries, as far as I can understand it, dealing with America, but there, as I say, we need to see the full details. But even so, the two biggest economies in the world, America and China, are now in a trade war. That is globally significant. Even though China's dependence on the US is less than it used to be, the reality is that both of these countries are heavily intertwined. At the same time, a quarter of US treasuries, quarter of US government debt is owned by international investors.
Yeah.
And the Chinese in particular own a significant proportion. So the two countries are intertwined. They're in a trade war. Now, one hopes that that is resolved.
Yes.
And at the same time, what we've seen in recent weeks is clarity being replaced by uncertainty when it comes to US economic policy.
Yes.
We still have uncertainty there. Now, that might not mean that international investors are going to continue to do what they've done in the last few days.
Yeah.
But it still means that many international investors will now think twice about the future safe haven status of the dollar and of US assets.
Yes. Yeah.
What President Trump has clearly instilled now is uncertainty and unpredictability into US economic policy.
Yes.
And while it's good that there's been some reversal and some resolution, that uncertainty is not removed. And we are also still not in a situation of zero tariffs. And there is still a lack of clarity in my mind as to how we move from here. So it's better than it was,
Yes.
but it's not ideal.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've moved into a period of uncertainty, as you say, so many questions on where we go from here, but it seems to have replaced a situation of something like meltdown. And that
Absolutely, that's very positive. Sorry, yeah, I completely agree with you on that. We were going to the next stage of an evolving financial crisis that threatened to become a global economic crisis. And I think the signals from the market have been heeded and taken on board, or that's my read of it in terms of the US.
Okay, I've got with me here Mikey Smith from the Mirror and Kate Ferguson from the Sun on Sunday. Joe, we're keen to sort of turn this into a, I suppose, what do we call it? A think-a-thon. What on earth is going to happen from here? And Sarah Baxter with us on the other side of the pond. But Kate,
Joe, can I ask you a question?
Yes, certainly.
Thanks. You talk about, so we know, don't we, that these big tariffs are still staying with China. So it looks like this trade war, as you alluded to, between America and China is here to stay, at least for now. What does that mean for Britain, for British consumers? Like, for my reader, what does that mean? It's bad news economically, but why?
Okay, there's two aspects. First, there's the direct impact that we've talked about in terms of the US and tariffs, and the fact that in the last week we weren't hit as badly as everyone else. But your question is about what everyone has called the next stage, the follow-up. And the point is this, that Britain is a very large, open economy. We're the fifth or sixth biggest economy in the world, depending on which figures you use. And we're heavily interlinked in the global economic system. If there's a trade war between the two biggest economies in the world, that tends not to just impact those two economies, but it has ramifications in terms of other countries that they interact with. Because what we know from history, from economic theory, and also from economic forecasting models, which admittedly influenced by the past, that when it comes to tariffs is one of these bizarre areas where usually good economics is good politics, but tariffs is one of those situations where politics and economics pull apart. So the economics suggests you don't impose tariffs, and the economics suggests you don't react with retaliatory tariffs. But the politics clearly in America and China suggest otherwise. So when countries go down the route of a trade war, it tends to, we know from history and theory and the models, that it tends to impact both those countries, impacts their their prices, impacts their spending behavior, and it permeates into trade.
Yeah.
Now, if it was just two very small countries, then it would be different. Now, tariffs have been around for a long time. At the end of last year, for instance, the European Union imposed tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. So sometimes regions and countries impose tariffs on each other, which are very specific. What we have here is something that's much broader and much wider. And so what catches us out, coming back to your question in the UK, is the indirect impact, how it impacts and permeates through the global trading system.
Yes. Yeah, and look, and a further question on that. And again, just to be very clear, that after all of this, comparative calm on the markets, and how could it be less calm than it has been in recent days? We still have 10% tariffs in place, which is exactly in the case of the United Kingdom where we were an hour ago, a day ago. I mean, days ago. And that number, Gerard, that was more than enough to cause, well, not just concern, but the certainty of a knock to British numbers, public finance numbers. The rate of economic growth was going to take a hit, and as things stand, are still going to take a hit. And the concerns are facing the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. Where does she go from here in her spending
I think that's
numbers?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, her spending numbers in a few weeks, and then the spending review after that. Those problems are unchanged by all of this. The task is as great as it was, Gerard.
That's right. A couple of weeks ago, we had the spring statement, and the independent forecaster, the OBR, revised down its growth forecast for this year, but revised up its growth forecast for future years. But the Chancellor has these self-imposed fiscal rules which don't give her much room for manoeuvre. Now, the OBR did 3 scenarios based on tariff policy, and on each of those, the UK economy was impacted in different ways. Now, we still need to see how things evolve here, but the UK economy is sort of recovering in some respects, growing at a modest pace, but is not resilient enough to global events, but more particularly when it comes to the government finances, it's almost like being in a hole and digging deeper. If the economy weakens or is hit by an external shock, what you ideally want is the Bank of England to cut interest rates, and they probably still will, but you want the Chancellor, through her fiscal policy, which is government spending and taxation, to ideally help the economy out. Well, we have this back-to-front policy situation where if the economic growth outlook becomes weaker, then because of the fiscal rules, that means the Chancellor has less room for manoeuvre, and therefore, based on those rules, she either borrows more, raises taxes, or cuts spending, or a combination of those. Ideally, what we would like is, if we have this situation causing uncertainty, then the Chancellor ideally should say, look, I'm committed to keeping fiscal policy sound, but I'm not going to be bound by these self-imposed fiscal rules for the moment. Let's have a bit of clarity externally. But the problem is, if you allow these rules to cause you to tighten policy, then you do the opposite of what you ideally need to be doing. So it's a self-imposed problem. On the positive, there is still scope for the Bank of England to ease rates. The markets ahead of this evening's announcement were factoring in 3 rate cuts, one in May, one in August, and another one before the end of the year. So Bank of England interest rates are now 4.5%. This afternoon, the markets were thinking rates would be down at 3.75 by the end of the year. The markets might change their expectations, but they will still expect, and I think they'll be correct, to expect rates in the UK to be down to at least 4% by the end of the year.
And just really, really briefly, maybe a cloud behind the silver lining. If all of rates outside China are level at 10%, then there was something of a competitive advantage for the United Kingdom in world markets. That now goes away.
Yes, that's right. We're clutching at straws when you have a backdrop of
you've got to do that
high
occasionally.
tariffs. But you're right. But I think it comes back to, we're pleased at the moment from our discussion because things were better than they were before, and they could have deteriorated further. So this pause is welcome news, but the uncertainty prevails, and it's still worrying when you have the world's 2 biggest economies loggerheads with each other, because it's unclear how that will fully play out.
All right, good to get your thoughts, Gerard. Thank you so much, Gerard Lyons. There, the chief economic strategist at Net Wealth. So about time up for us, guys. Mikey and Kate, closing thoughts. The story turns again on its head.
I know. I was thinking, how am I going to do tariffs for the weekend paper? But there's no point even trying to plan in this kind of topsy-turvy Trump world. All roads lead back to Trump, don't they? At a stroke of the pen, at a tweet on Truth Social, he can just, define politics all over the world. and markets. So it's just it's crazy times, really.
Okay, Mike, I've got to move on. Katie's taking over. I see. Look, you're allowed to be speechless at this moment. that every now and again that happens. Sarah Baxter on the other side of the pond. Thank you so much for joining us. So let's talk again about this. There's going to be a whole other conversation to be had, I think, after this. Angus Mitchell, our producer, Isaac Marley, our technical operator, Kate Borsay, is all ready to pick up the baton. This is Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio, the voice of the Times.
Thanks, John. Have a great night. It's 7 o'clock. This is Kate Borsay and the Evening Edition. Coming up.
These countries are calling us up, kissing my ass. They are dying to make a deal. Please, sir, make a deal.
What a difference a few hours makes. That was Donald Trump last night. Now he's paused tariffs to 10% for 90 days on all countries apart from China, who he's increased measures to 125%, all effective immediately. We'll get live reaction from Trump's former chief economic advisor, Thomas Phillipson, and ask an expert on China how far their trade war might go. We'll also speak to the former chair of the EU's Committee on Foreign Affairs. Will Europe now follow suit? And we'll take a sneak peek inside tomorrow's Times. But first, a full news update with Laura Cook.
Thank you. Good evening. Donald Trump has announced a 90-day pause on tariffs, except for China, causing a surge in American stock markets. There were huge spikes in the green after the US president made his announcement in a social media post. He's doubling down on China, though. Chinese products coming in will be taxed at 125%, another jump, which he says is because they countered with charges of their own on American goods. The United States has told countries they'll be rewarded if they don't retaliate. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has been speaking outside the White House.
China is the most imbalanced economy in the history of the modern world, and they are the biggest source of the U.S. trade problems. And indeed, they are problems for the rest of the world, because what we've seen is that as the U.S. announced a tariff wall last week, many of those goods have already started flooding into Europe.
Meanwhile, Victor Gao leads a top think tank in Beijing.
China will not be the first to blink, in my best judgment. So the question is, who is going to be the first to blink? It's not going to be China.
Relatives of a woman stabbed to death at Notting Hill Carnival say her daughter's last living memory of her mother is falling to the floor. A 20-year-old man's been found guilty of murdering Cher Maximin last August. An abuser who murdered her husband and buried him in their garden in Kent has been jailed for at least 22 years. Prosecutors say Maureen Rickards, who is 50, caused Jeremy unimaginable pain and suffering in Canterbury. The NHS will remove 300,000 people from hospital waiting lists under a clean-up drive to scrap pointless appointments. The new scheme is expected to make a significant dent in the NHS waiting lists of 7.43 million and free up consultants to see those most in need. Health editor at The Times, Eleanor Hayward, explains one of the key findings.
A lot of patients on this 7.4 million long waiting list actually don't need to be there at all. They're on a waiting list for hospital treatment, but they could just as easily get a scan from a little clinic in their community, or they could just have gone straight for physio treatment or have a test by their GP.
The Kings told the Italian Parliament peace should never be taken for granted.
I am here today, ladies and gentlemen, with one purpose: to reaffirm the deep friendship between the United Kingdom and Italy, and to pledge to do all in my power to strengthen that friendship.
The Queen's with him in Rome, and on the couple's 20th anniversary, she's wearing her wedding dress decorated with added embroidery. They're attending a state banquet tonight. Now, let's get the latest from the markets.
Times Radio Market Watch in association with Saxo. The simple, low-cost way to invest in your future. Capital at risk.
The FTSE 100 closed down 231 points at 7,679. The FTSE 250 also closed down 458 points at 17,890. A few moments ago, the Dow Jones was up 2,184 points at 39,830. The pound is worth $1.28 and €1.16. And you can see full reaction and full analysis on Donald Trump's tariff announcements on the business section of the Times website.
Times Radio Market Watch in association with Saxo. The simple, low-cost way to invest in your future. Capital at risk.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. Kate Borsay on Times Radio, sponsored by Nutmeg.
You have given us a clear mandate, and we will use it to deliver change.
This is a marathon, not a sprint.
There is a buzz, there is an energy, there is an optimism.
To restore service and respect to politics.
We are the generation that will take the NHS from the worst crisis in its history to build an NHS fit for the future.
I will not rest until we have delivered the strong, safe and prosperous America that our children deserve.
Our first responsibility is to hold this Labour government to account.
It is the evening edition. It's Kate Borsay with you on Times Radio through until 10 o'clock. Here for 3 hours of news, politics and thought-provoking conversation. We've got some fresh stories to bring you as well this evening, getting you ahead of tomorrow's news agenda. But first, the breaking news. Ever since Donald Trump's self-styled Liberation Day just 1 week ago, where he announced his version of reciprocal tariffs worldwide, the markets have been reeling. The only nation to really bite back with intent, China. This evening, just in the last half an hour, the US president has lowered all tariffs to 10% for a 90-day pause for all countries bar China, who've had their tariffs increased to 125%. Go figure. The US have insisted the pause comes about after inquiries from over 75 countries. They've met a request, they say, by those countries to buy them some time. Stocks, though, have surged. And maybe that's really all Donald Trump needs to know. Joining us to react to the breaking news this evening, David Smith, the economics editor for the Sunday Times, Dexter Roberts, China hawk and senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, and Elmar Brok, former German MEP and chairman of the European Parliament Committee on Foreign Affairs. Also this evening, a bit of light relief for mortgage holders in light of the global economic turmoil. And the NHS aims to remove 300,000 patients from their waiting list in the next 12 weeks. Find out how. We'll take a dip inside tomorrow's paper, and with us to cover the big stories of the day, Lisa McKenzie, the academic and author, and Albi Amankona, the Conservative commentator. Do not move the dial. This is Times Radio reacting to all the breaking news. You can get in touch 0333 003 2353 via WhatsApp. You can text us 87222, start your message with the word Times, or tweet us at Times Radio.
The Evening Edition with Kate Borsay on Times Radio.
Good evening. It's 7 minutes past 7 here on Times Radio. It's the Evening Edition. Let's start with that breaking story. Donald Trump has announced a 90-day reduction in reciprocal tariffs on all countries apart from China. Levies have been shrunk down to 10% on imports from all countries, whereas China's will be increased to 125%. Here's the US Secretary to the Treasury, Scott Bessent, speaking outside the White House in the last 30 minutes.
President Trump created maximum negotiating leverage for himself, and which tariffs went into effect 15 hours ago. The ones that we have lowered went into effect a week ago. They were announced a week ago, and we have just been overwhelmed by the response from mostly our allies who want to come and negotiate in good faith.
Let's speak to David Smith, economics editor at the Sunday Times. David, good evening to you. Thank you for joining us to help us react to this breaking news. Interestingly, it has caused a spike in the markets.
It has, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the share prices, as you know, have been very under the weather since Liberation Day a week ago, and they're up very sharply. You know, one of the sharpest one-day gains we've seen. The Nasdaq's up about 8%, the S&P 500 about 5 or 6%, and that, if maintained, will be reflected tomorrow when the London market reopens. So it's a relief rally, I think we can say.
It has come about, hasn't it, after probably the most turbulent day so far for the United States. And this concerns government bonds, doesn't it? The all-important US Treasury bonds. Just explain what may have been the straw that broke the camel's back. It may only be 90 days. It may be tariffs are still at 10%. But clearly Donald Trump, well, I think we can interpret this as more than just a trade war against China. It is probably, although it's not said in as many words, reactionary.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, the idea that this is all about lots of countries getting in touch with America and wanting to negotiate, I think, is for the birds. This was there's been a market panic, and I think the reason why bonds, government bonds in the main, but also some corporate bonds have been suffering is because a lot of traders had lost money in the stock market, were losing money in the stock market after a fall they didn't anticipate, and so were having to cover their positions. They were facing what are known as margin calls, and as a result of that had to sell bonds, and that's why the price of bonds fell, and the yield, the cost of the interest rate cost to government of funding its deficits went up. And this was slightly reminiscent of what happened to us in September 2022, the panic we had then. And so I think this was the straw that broke the camel's back, as you say. This was the thing that triggered this response. It's still very chaotic. This is not the way to do economic policy, and I think Trump's unpredictability is, I think, going to be with us for some time. And you don't know what's going to happen after 90 days. I suspect that most countries will stay at this 10%. But it's quite interesting. I think if you try and see some logic in what Trump was trying to do. Obviously, China has been his main target and continues to be his main target with this 125% tariff. But if you look at those other Far Eastern countries like Cambodia and Vietnam, where in his first term, they initially, not now, but initially faced very high tariffs, 46, 47%, something like that. And I think what he was trying to do there was to stop Chinese companies from relocating production to those other countries like Vietnam and Cambodia, and then selling into the States from there, which is what happened when he had a trade war with China in his first term. So I think bringing them down to 10% obviously slightly knocks that strategy, but it means that the trade war is firmly pinned now between America and China.
Yeah, it certainly does. It offers protection for America against China, doesn't it? If those goods are flowing more freely and at less of a tariff cost than they would have been, it gives the US more of a buffer against China. Where does this China trade war go? So they're now at 125%. That has come about because they increased tariffs on the US to 84% today. Where does this ultimately go? I mean, I'm aware that, China holds a lot of money, almost 600 billion in US government bonds. I mean, obviously, if they were to have a complete hissy fit and sell those, that would also make China suffer as well. But I wonder about the sort of longer term. Where does this go? Because at the moment, it's only resulting in increased tariffs. It is a proper tit-for-tat trade war at the moment.
Yeah. Well, America is never going to eliminate its trade deficit with China, and American consumers are going to feel the effects of this 125% tariff, as they would have done, the previous steps up. A lot of cheap goods in America, goods sold in Walmart and places like that, are originate from China, and ordinary people, Trump voters will notice that, the price of a T-shirt, the price of all sorts of consumer goods is going to be a lot higher as a result of these tariffs. And I think they'll have to think about that, because it will add to prices. It will add to, it'll be a temporary effect on inflation, both of the 125%, but also the remaining 10% on everybody else. This is going to be a big effect on the prices that people pay. And of course, as we always say, it's the US consumers that pay the tariffs. It's not foreign governments or foreign companies. It's the US consumer. And so I think there is still pain to come, even despite this, as I say, the stock market taking this as a sign of relief, that it's not as bad as it could have been, but it's still very, very, as I say, uncertain, very, very volatile, and you just don't know what this president is going to do from day to day,
no.
and that's not a good recipe for stability or for confidence.
And as Kate Ferguson was just saying with John Pienaar, here is someone who puts a post on social media before anyone utters a word. His top team, Caroline Levitt, the press secretary, the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, having to react to the President of the United States posting news that affects world markets on a social media site. It is extraordinary, isn't it?
It is extraordinary. And they, and so the line they're all pursuing at the moment is this shows what a great deal maker he is, the art of the deal in practice. What it shows is he's a president who never likes to admit defeat, never likes to perform a U-turn, but in the end, I think the pressure got to him, and a lot of his backers on Wall Street, as you've been reporting earlier in the week, wanted this 90-day pause, and I think they've got it essentially because they know the markets. Trump doesn't know the markets that well, but he knew there was a problem there, and that's what he's responded to.
Where does this leave those countries who've announced retaliatory tariffs beyond China? So I'm thinking about EU member states today who approved 25% tariffs on a range of US products. This is in response to the first wave of tariffs announced initially. That is the aluminium and steel tariffs. Then, of course, we got the car tariffs. But this is just in response to that first wave of tariffs, 25% on US goods coming into the EU. Would Donald Trump now expect the EU to not go ahead with that? It's sort of an interesting proposition to think about, isn't it?
It is. And as you said, the policy made by posts on social media that nobody was expecting, nobody knows about. There just isn't that kind of detail available. I mean, presumably the 25% tariffs on cars still applies. Presumably the 25% tariffs on.
Well, we don't know, do we? Unless all tariffs.
We simply don't know. I think over the course of the next few hours, you would hope that the U.S. Commerce Department would be able to put out a definitive list of where we are in terms of all those tariffs. Where does this leave, Mark Carney in Canada, who's retaliated? Where does it leave the Mexican government? They were left off the Liberation Day list because they are already in a trade battle with America because of Trump's tariffs. It is a bit of a mess, I think. I mean, it's we should be pleased that he seems to be drawing back a bit, but we should also be quite troubled by how confusing and chaotic this is.
It is. And do you know what, David? There's nothing we can do about it at the moment, apart from report on it and try and keep sane. Thank you for your help in that direction. Always great to speak to you. David Smith, economics editor of the Sunday Times. Goodness knows where this story will be by Sunday. David, I feel your pain. David Smith there speaking to us. Our thanks to him. Let's continue to get more reaction then. A reminder of our top story. It's 17 minutes past 7 here on Times Radio. It is the evening edition. President Trump has announced a temporary 90-day pause on tariffs to all countries, meaning that for the time being they will pay 10% on imports into the United States. We understand this is just for reciprocal tariffs. Those reciprocal tariffs announced a week ago today. A trade war, though, with China continues. Their tariffs have been increased to 125% in the last 45 minutes. Here's Press Secretary Caroline Levitt speaking about the trade war with China.
Many of you in the media clearly missed the art of the deal. You clearly failed to see what President Trump is doing here. You tried to say that the rest of the world would be moved closer to China when in fact we've seen the opposite effect. The entire world is calling the United States of America, not China, because they need our markets, they need our consumers, and they need this president in the Oval Office to talk to them. And that's exactly why more than 75 countries have called.
There we go, Caroline Levitt speaking in the last 40 minutes or so. How does Europe respond to this? We can extend the story further now here on the evening edition. Let's speak to Elmar Brok, who's a former German MEP and former chair of the European Parliament Committee on Foreign Affairs. Good evening, Elmar.
Good evening.
Let's just get some initial reaction from you, first of all, on Donald Trump announcing that temporary 90-day pause on tariffs to all countries. They are going down to a baseline of 10%, all but China, that is. What do you think's going on here?
Look, he plays around every day a new proposal, but it has all starting point that the United States is right, that everyone was unfair to the United States until now, and that the United States is in the middle of everything. And that is not a way to run international rule-based trade, rule-based policy at all. And I think that is the problem, and we should not be nervous about new timetables. Everyone should be ready to negotiate, but negotiate on the basis of equality and partnership.
Well, he says that this has come about because over 75 countries have contacted him and his officials and asked to speak to him, asked to negotiate, I suppose is probably the word that Donald Trump would like to use in this case. So he's giving them a chance to catch up with themselves. He's giving them a pause of 90 days so that he can respond to everyone country by country. Do you buy that?
Look, he has always also said that he will not change his position. The question is that the others have to change their positions. The European Union has proposed to have zero tariffs on goods, not only on cars, on goods. But he has rejected that already. And therefore, his aim is that he has a surplus in customs. And this is a way to finance his programs and to finance American deficits. And if that is the goal, he will not come to a fair treatment of partners.
Let's just talk about the EU. So today, EU member states approved 25% tariffs on a range of US products, things like almonds, orange juice, poultry, soybeans, steel and aluminium. You know, these are products produced in, Rust Belt states.
And Harley-Davidson, not forget.
Yes, yeah. They are largely produced in red states, Republican states, and many have viewed this as the EU hitting America where it hurts. They've approved those. That is in response to the first set of tariffs that Donald Trump announced, aluminium and steel. I'm not sure whether it applies to cars as well. We also don't know whether the 10% applies to the initial set of tariffs that Donald Trump instructed upon the world or not. I have to caveat that. But what does the EU do now in response to what we've heard from Donald Trump? He's lowered it down to 10%. Does the EU then drop those 25% tariffs? Does it carry on regardless? Does it concern itself with whether actually this might provoke a response from Donald Trump because they're not playing to his conciliatory tone?
I think if this 25% are done on such goods in answer to the aluminium and steel customs proposals by the American president, if he decreases that figures, I think the European Union should also decrease the figures. But I think does it mean overall? And then we have to see what it means that we have a fair relationship in that. If he is ready to go down to 10% on everything, I think we can make easier a deal with him and find a compromise. Then he goes up with the proposals for the European Union, for example, all goods 39%, as it was his proposal before.
Hungary did not vote in favour of these EU tariffs today. Are you concerned?
Look, Hungary has the ability to be the friend both of Putin and Trump.
Yes, I completely agree with that. That was expected, really, to be honest. Are you worried about the other EU member states, though, perhaps starting to differ slightly, especially with this new pause announced by Donald Trump this evening? Do you worry about about any of the other member states splintering off. Giorgia Meloni, for example, is going to see Donald Trump at the White House last week. There are whispers at the White House next week. There are whispers that that's upset Macron of France, for instance, that he might be a little paranoid about what Giorgia Meloni might be speaking to Donald Trump about. Do you see all member states sticking together, or are you concerned about fractures?
Look, we have stuck together in the past about it. In the proposals on the first Trump customs proposal 2017. We have done now again on steel and aluminium, partly with the same proposals at that time. And we will do it also in the other questions. And I think that the European Union will find a compromise between themselves. We have 27 countries who have to find a compromise. But I think until now, the Commission was always able to come to a common position here, and therefore there will an answer. But this new proposal for sure will be in the next Council meeting a reason for consideration.
OK, well, look, good to speak to you. Thank you for your counsel. Elmar Brok, former German MEP, former chair of the European Parliament Committee on Foreign Affairs. Thanks for being with us. Much appreciated. You can get your thoughts in 0333 003 2353. If you'd like to drop us a WhatsApp, you can also text us 87222. Start your message with the word Times. This is Kate Borsay. It's the evening edition on Times Radio, sponsored by Nutmeg.